Next, we have House Bill 165, Delegate Crosby. I understand you do not have a panel, am I
Do
right?
not. Army of one.
All right,
Yeah,
go
it should
ahead,
be
let's,
relatively quick.
wonderful.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Congratulations publicly.
One second, 1 minute. Sir,
oh,
you have
sorry.
to sit down. Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Congratulations again, and members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Brian Crosby here on House Bill 165, General Provision, Standard Time, year-round daylight savings time. This is the third straight year I've brought the bill, and the bill is in the exact same form it passed out of the House the last 2 years. All it simply says is two components. Maryland will go to year-round daylight saving time if the federal government amends the Uniform Time Code, which has not happened. It passed out of the Senate 2 years ago. And all the surrounding jurisdictions also adopt the same measure. Currently, only one of those jurisdictions, I believe it's Delaware, has this. There are proposals in other states. But if the trend and the movement goes that way, we just want to make sure that we are on the same time zone as everybody else. To be completely honest, I just want my clock to stop changing. That's it. It drives me nuts. And frankly, the statistics are pretty overwhelming. And it is somewhat of a public health crisis, I think, that the 2 years or the 2 weeks following the time change, suicides, miscarriages, heart attacks, strokes are all up. Car accidents are up, and they seem to really be related to your circadian rhythm and your internal clock, and they are the most dangerous times of the year. And that's the whole impetus behind the bill. I can tell you there are going to obviously be proponents for standard time versus daylight saving time. I brought the bill in as permanent daylight saving time just because it seems like the overwhelming majority of people agree with that. And I think that there are polls. The last one I viewed was CBS, where it's over 50% of people agreed with daylight saving time. 30% were about standard time, and then I would really like to meet the 20% of people who like to go back and forth, but they were the remainder. When I first brought it in, the committee took kind of a straw poll, and it seemed to also go with permanent daylight saving time, overwhelmingly, probably more so than any of the polls. The benefits to daylight saving time year-round, generally a little bit more of a healthier population because there's more sunlight in the afternoon, so more people work out. It is more pro-business because there's more time to shop and people like to be out and about, especially in hours of sunlight. They can walk to the stores, and there is a reduction in crime with the more sunlight. So. For those reasons, I urge the committee for a favorable report.
Thank you for being with us again. We appreciate it. Are there any questions for the delegate? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have some witnesses. We have a favorable from Mr. Matthew Ribel.
Yes.
Yes, how are you? You can come and sit. How are you today?
Yeah, I am doing fine. I agree with what Crosby just said. And who just spoke? Crosby?
Yeah, Delegate Crosby, yes.
And the House Bill 165.
Yes.
I'm Matt Ribel, and I do realize there have been countless studies over the past 20, 30 years showing the dangers of the springing forward. There's heart attacks, and there's a lot of heart attacks, up 25%. There's a 10% jump in car accidents, and students do a lot worse on their tests in school. And we have judges hand out harsher sentences, and work productivity is lower because employees are more tired. And in the fall change, it seems that it's easier to adjust, but there's not enough benefit to offset what happens in the springtime change. And I also hate the argument that the people from start school later give like against daylight savings time year round, because I think that there's going to be the same issue with start school later, balancing what the parents want for family activities and what's best for them biologically. Maybe on permanent standard time, adults would be ready to start work at 8 a.m. and would want their children start in high school at 7:30, and start school later would recommend they start at 9. But on permanent daylight saving, maybe adults would be ready for work at 9 and they'd want their children start in high school at 8:30, and start school later will recommend start at 10. So we have the same amount of imbalance no matter how we label the hours on the clock. So I do not see permanent daylight saving in the long run as a problem for start school later.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me see if there are some questions for you. 1 second. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming today. We really appreciate hearing from you.
You're welcome.
And we'll take what you said into consideration when we make a decision, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Lisa VanBuskirk from Star School Later. You have to sit down, sir. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Chair Pena-Melnick, Vice Chair Kelly, and members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. I'm Lisa VanBuskirk of Start School Later, Maryland. This is my 4th year testifying in opposition to permanent daylight savings time. This year it's House Bill 165. My written comments are longer and include a number of enclosures that I hope you will review. What is the difference between permanent daylight savings time versus status quo or permanent standard time? It's the difference between sunrise on the opening day of the Maryland General Assembly being at 8:24 in the morning versus 7:24 in the morning if you were coming to work at 7:30. Today's sunrise was at 6:57, a month into session, and the daylight is already increasing in the morning and evening, but under permanent daylight savings time, sunrise would barely be before 8 a.m. Permanent daylight savings time combined with the current 2 early school start times would have an even greater negative impact on adolescent circadian rhythm, safety, health, and academics. It is contrary to the intent of previous state legislation regarding school bell times, including 2014's House Bill 883, 2016's House Bill 39, both of which were sponsored by now new Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller. This school year, Anne Arundel County implemented new school hours aligned with expert recommendations. Next week, Howard County's Board of Education will vote on new school start and end times. This bill would negate both efforts, which are nearly 30 years in the making, which is why MABE and AACPS opposed DST legislation previously. Under daylight savings times, more Maryland students of all ages would walk or wait for buses in the dark. Please see my enclosure listing all of the school systems with schools starting before sunrise at all levels. House Bill 165 requires adjacent states to also pass permanent daylight savings time legislation. Last month, Virginia's Senate defeated a permanent daylight savings time bill. Please vote for an unfavorable report on House Bill 165, amend the bill to permanent standard time, or amend the bill to include a mandate for minimum safe, healthy, and age-appropriate start times for all students. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness? We have Delegate Hill.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the chance to ask you a question, because I've been listening to Senate hearings, down in Washington, and these hearings for a while. I don't see where the time we start our workday or school day is locked to anything. So if we adopt a standard, regardless of which one, if it's too early when we go to work or whatever, won't we just change that? So for instance, the average workday in Chicago's starts at 8 because they want to be on time with what we're doing on the East Coast. So they don't go 9 to 5, they go 8 to 4. So why wouldn't we just adjust the time school starts to the work starts to go with, so we get enough sunshine?
Sure, and I would be fine with that. Other than my experience, I've been the chapter leader for Start School Later since 2015. And so Anne Arundel County took 30 years to make this decision to change start times. So because it's all an issue of local control, unless you actually include a mandate to change start times, I think the school systems will not actually act on that, because they already have students going at unsafe hours in the dark as it is. So unless there's a groundswell of opposition from parents about the number of students in the dark and forcing them to change school start times, then that would be fine. But I don't see that happening, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Delegate Johnson. It's, you know what, she went to the back to get something for my throat, so you can go ahead and ask it. We can hear you.
Do you have any statistics on how many accidents there are for school students going to work or going to school in the dark hours?
Well, I do know in 1974, when we did change to permanent daylight savings times, within the first month, there were several deaths of students that were blamed on the dark early morning hours. But as far as current statistics, I do not.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for your time.
I don't see any. Thank you for your time. I have Mr. James Crabtree. I also have JP and Jens Christian. Will you all come up, please? You can get started.
Dear members of the Health and Government Operations Committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify against House Bill 165. I'm James Crabtree, a Maryland resident and volunteer for Save Standard Time. On the darkest days of the year, the temptation of more time to spend in the sun can be challenging to resist. And in 1973, as the United States faced an energy crisis, federal lawmakers were enticed by the promise of brighter evenings and passed the same policy of permanent daylight saving time that Maryland's now considering. Then the first Monday of 1974 came and the sun rose at 8:25 a.m. in Annapolis. Jet blackness, as one mother described the scene at her daughter's bus stop, engulfed the nation until long after morning commuters had departed for work or school. While standard time was not due to return until October 1975, the failed experiment was ended 1 year early to spare citizens a second consecutive winter of morning misery. Scientists warn that exposure to excess evening sunlight and insufficient morning sunlight chronically worsens health, public safety, and the economy. Similarly, experts advise that humans operate ideally when the center of daylight hours roughly corresponds with civil noon, a phenomenon that occurs only when clocks are set to standard time. Introducing an hour of misalignment between solar time and circadian time perpetually deprives sleep, which explains all the negative trends that are associated with daylight saving time. While all residents of Maryland would suffer from the ramifications of extending DST through the winter, I often hear this issue discussed in the specific context of school start times. The academic day at most middle schools and high schools in Maryland already begins before the earliest time of 8:30 recommended by tens of organizations dedicated to pediatric health, forcing students to battle their own biology to arrive at their morning classes on time. DST shifts school start times 1 additional hour earlier relative to the time of sunrise, negating all efforts to give students a healthy amount of morning sunlight before school. As a current high school student, the proposal or the prospect of seeing the sun first on January mornings halfway through my first class of the day instead of during my drive to school does not particularly appeal to me. No adjustment of time can make winter feel like summer, though extending DST can make winters far more dismal. I ask anyone who's interested in keeping time honest and helpful for an unfavorable report on House Bill 165, which seeks to redefine midnight as 1 hour before the middle of the night at the expense of quality of life and life itself. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your time today. We appreciate it. Are there any questions for this witness? Yes, Delegate Kerr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Crabtree, I have a question. If there had been an amendment to say that this would be standard time, would you still have come in unfavorable, or would you have been favorable with amendment?
I would have come in favorable if it were favorable with amendment if it had been modified to standard time. Or if that were being proposed, I would definitely request an amendment to permanent standard time. That would still satisfy the overall desire to end clock changes, but several organizations, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, American Medical Association, just to name a few off the top of my head, all endorse permanent standard time and strongly oppose permanent daylight time.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your time today. We do have for the committee 2 virtual testimony, so we're going to wait a second for them to come on. The first one is Mr. JP, and the second one is Jens Christian. And I want to thank staff. Thank you for your work. Okay, I know this is a little bit challenging to do both, and we appreciate it. Good afternoon, sir. will you please get started?
Yes, thank you. Hello, Honorable Chair, committee members. Thank you for having me. My name is JP. I'm the president of the nonprofit Save Standard Time. I'm here to ask that you would oppose House Bill 165 and recommend its amendment to permanent standard time. We oppose permanent daylight time. We support permanent standard time. We agree that ending the clock change is a good idea, but going with permanent daylight time is worse than clock change. It would force early waking, to try to increase spending at the expense of health, safety, and education. Standard time is the real clock defined from the natural world, from the sun. It's best for the well-being of the public. This is the position of the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Neurology, the American College of Chest Physicians, the National Safety Council, the National PTA, even writers from Bloomberg, Cato, Daily Wire. This is bipartisan opposition to permanent daylight time and a call instead for permanent standard time. Mexico just recently restored permanent standard time. Permanent standard time is already observed in Arizona, Hawaii, all 5 U.S. territories, most nations on Earth. Your neighbor of Virginia just last month defeated a bill for permanent daylight time just like this bill. It's been tried in the U.S. Twice before. It fails. It costs children's lives. It's been tried and failed in other countries as well. Really, the crux of it is it makes your sunrise too late. Your sunrise in Annapolis today would have been at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is too late with most school and work starting around that time. A month ago, your sunrise would be at 8:30 if this bill were put into place. It'd be after 8 o'clock for nearly 3 months. It'd be even worse in places in Western Maryland. So if you were to ask your constituents, do they want to set their alarm clock an hour early all of winter from November through March and get up and go to work or school in the dark on those dark, icy roads? They would say, no, don't set my alarm clock early. I want to sleep. But that's what this bill would force them to do. It would force them to get up early in the morning and go to school and work in the dark. So please oppose this bill, recommend an amendment to standard time, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. Thanks again.
Thank you for your testimony today. Are there any questions for this witness? Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the sponsor of the bill. Appreciate your comments, sir. My question for you is this: what would you say to people living in Greenland, Scandinavia, Alaska, maybe Tierra del Fuego, who live normally and productively under a meteorological regime that involves being in the dark a lot of the time? Is it so terrible to wake up when it's dark and finish your workday when it's dark? There are millions of people, humans have done it for millennia. How bad could it be?
Yes, well, you can look at rates of depression rise statistically the further away from the equator you are. There's a reason why most of the public lives at mid-latitudes and many dream of retiring to further southern latitudes closer to the equator. Rates of depression comparing Los Angeles to Seattle, I think, are 10% greater, and going into Alaska, 25% greater. And the way to combat that is exposure to morning light. They sell these sun lamps, and they recommend exposure to them in the morning to try to wake up the body and feel better. So if you were to ask your residents, do they want to move to Greenland? I think they would say no. And if you were to ask them, do they want to wake up an hour early in January, I think they would also say no.
Delegate Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Based on the information provided, it appears that the proposed bill aims to address the negative effects of biannual clock changes. The evidence cited suggests that the clock, to change the clock, is associated with several negative outcomes. This is a health committee, such as increase in fatal car crashes, to depressive episode, to heart attacks, to stroke, workplace injuries, emergency responses to suicide and fatal car accident. Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, the action of changing the clock, springing it forward every year in March, causes acute harm to health and safety. It does have a spike in heart attacks, car accidents, and other dangers. However, leaving the clock on daylight saving time also causes chronic harm to those same issues. When we stay on daylight time, we have elevated rates of cancer, heart disease, stroke, obesity. The science really does show that we need the exposure to morning light, and we need the circadian alignment, the balance of light in the morning and the evening. When we're on daylight time, we are losing light in the morning to add it to the evening, and that is causing less sleep and less quality of sleep each night that we stay on daylight time. So that is why it's the opinion of the American Medical Association and literally dozens of others that the current situation is the happy medium, the compromise, if you will, but the optimal solution would be permanent standard time, and permanent daylight time would be worse than the current situation.
Delegate Hill.
Thank you. So, granted that daylight exposure earlier in the day is more positive than daylight exposure later, but whether it's earlier in the day versus later is a function of when we define the start of the day. So if you're a restaurant worker and you're showing up to work at 4 in the morning, your day is starting at 4 or 5 in the morning. If you're, another job, maybe you're a night dancer, maybe your day doesn't start to 1. So isn't it really, just stop the switching back and forth, and then maybe, even if it takes a while, as the previous witness says, we might have to figure out whether a 10 o'clock start day or a 7 o'clock start day is the better standard to use, but it really isn't a matter of whether it's standard data. I mean, all of these things were chosen. I mean, there was nothing about that fixed these times except for us. We chose what time we considered the start of a business day. We choose what time we consider the end of a day. Or what am I missing here?
Well, thank you for that question. If you are a shift worker, if you're working at night, if you're starting at 4 in the morning, statistically, you have a higher rate of cancer because you are lacking that exposure to the morning light. And if you were to implement permanent daylight time, you'd be forcing everybody to start earlier in the morning. So you would be increasing rates of cancer for the general population. Would we adjust? The history shows we do not adjust. When the U.S. tried this in 1974, we had deaths of children within the first month. So I don't know how many deaths of children would be worth it for the adjustment. Russia tried it for 3 years and they never adjusted. They saw students' test scores to crash and rates of depression to skyrocket. And if somehow we were able to get through this and adjust over several years, then there would really be no point in that, because if you are talking about permanently moving the clock forward and then also permanently adjusting schedules, you're right back where you started. You might as well just skip all of that suffering and go directly to permanent standard time, which really is the clock that is objectively defined from nature, where noon is literally the middle of the day and midnight is the middle of the night.
So I think what I heard you say is you don't think we would, but we certainly could. You said
history
suggest that we
shows,
wouldn't, but we could.
Thank you for the question. The history shows that we do not adjust. That is the opinion of the researchers, the doctors and scientists. Again, it was tried for 3 years in Russia and they never adjusted. And the first month that it was tried in the United States, it caused 8 children's deaths. So I don't know how many children's deaths would be worth it to see if we could adjust. But as the years pass, we've not seen that adjustment ever comes.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate
Thank you.
it. We have next we have Jens Christian. While he comes up, I was going to ask the last witness, how's the weather in San Francisco? Because that's where he's testifying from. Oh, I should, yeah, how Riverside, California is. The following one is from Riverside, California. Probably better weather
Yes,
than
Madam
ours.
Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, how are you?
Fine, thank you. My name is actually pronounced Jens. The J
Jens?
has a Y sound.
It's great to see you. How's the weather in California?
Quite beautiful today. It's actually approaching about 16, 17 Celsius. We had a really chilly night last night after some rain, so it's back to good old SoCal weather again.
Wonderful. Well, tell us, give us your testimony, please.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jens Christian. I'm also a volunteer with the nonprofit Save Standard Time, and I'm here to testify in opposition to HB 165. I do support the position of the American Academy of Neurology, Society for Research on Biological Rhythms, and the American Medical Association, who have all made it abundantly clear that permanent standard time is the clock that we do need to keep. Now, HB 165's permanent daylight saving time creates an unhealthy bias towards evening light. It would darken mornings, taking away light that is otherwise essential to human biology and cognitive functioning. And while I understand that permanent DST proponents, including the bill author, argue that evening light is more important, for the economy and mental health, particularly where seasonal affective disorder is concerned, the data actually indicates that it's increased exposure to morning light that stays off SAD and which the clock of standard time provides, and not DST. So HB 165 will more than likely trigger an SAD epidemic, and I do find that deeply concerning. So I urge you all to please read the NIH peer-reviewed medical journal paper by A.J. Louis from 1998, which concluded that the timing of AM light exposure best treats the disease. Now, relatives of mine actually who reside in upstate New York, and my brother who resided in Rhode Island for several years, they all remark how dark the mornings become with DST, especially in March when we spring forward. And before we fall back in November, it truly is hard on the body, and the misalignment between the sun and our social clock becomes quite pronounced during those times. And it's really disconcerting to see legislators ignoring failed historical precedents of permanent DST in the US in 1974, Portugal from 92 to 96, and in Russia from 2011 to 14, all which the provision was ultimately repealed. So please, let's not repeat failed history. We can stop switching clocks faster with federally pre-approved permanent standard time, which will actually meet constituent demands for any time changes right now. I ask for an unfavorable on HB 165. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your time. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. You have a great day.
You too. Likewise.